So, welcome back after coffee. We will now bring this topic into the Swedish context. And we have made a change in the program, a change of the order. So we will actually start with meeting two politicians here. We have Jakob Dalunde, Member of Parliament and in the Defense Committee for the Green Party. And we also have Jan R. Andersson, represents a moderate party and also in the Defense Committee, dealing and interested in these issues, of course. And I would like to start asking you, what reflections have you made after this first session? Jakob Dalunde, please start.
Thank you. I would say that my impression is that information operations isn't necessarily something new. So the reason that we're talking more about it right now is not the changing security environment, but rather the change in the information infrastructure. That society now has become more vulnerable towards these information operations. And therefore we as a society has to take more responsibility in creating a society that is resilient towards these information operations.
Okay, Jan R. Andersson.
Are we on? Working?
Yes.
Are you hearing me? No? It's okay. Okay. Well, first I would like to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here. Two very interesting speeches before us, which I could have been, if I had the knowledge, I would have said the same things, because I think Sweden somewhat had a wake-up call. I reckon the biggest Swedish newspaper printed article about the shooting down of a plane over Ukraine, which was quite falsified and was product of information campaign, probably from Russia. And I think the biggest newspaper in Sweden and other newspapers thought that after they found out that they had been lied about this news, they really took a new stand in how to approach media. So
I think we need to...
mikrofonen borde funka ändå. Ja, hörs det bättre? Ja. Well, anyway, I think it was a wake-up call for Sweden when a lot of the Swedish newspapers found out that the media landscape is quite different from earlier. And I think it's important for us all, as well as in politics or in media, that we understand that the truth is not always the truth, and that we have to have better sources of information and better journalistic work. In a quite much faster and faster media environment, you must stop and think, is this really a good source? Is this really the truth? That's a big wake-up call for politicians as well as media.
Yes, I would add that even though I personally very much enjoy this 24-hour news cycle that we get information so quickly, there's also the backside to this, that previously maybe journalists felt that they have a longer time to investigate a story because they knew they could understand the issue and then have several hours during the day until you had to file your report late in the evening and then have it printed during the night. And now there's a pressure to put out these articles more quickly, and therefore we are more vulnerable towards falsified information operations.
Let me just say that I would be happy to bring in questions from you in the audience. We will have this as like a discussion session with the politicians and take the opportunity and to ask them whatever questions. And yes, there will be a microphone coming to you. Let me just ask you briefly. So how important do you think that this topic is? We have heard now the very interesting presentations here, and it's really a serious challenge that we have to deal with. Is this on top of the agenda? Is that in the parliament, or how would you describe?
Yeah, I think it is, because Well, of course, Sweden, we don't have a big Russian diaspora that the Russian authorities could approach. So I think if you're getting approached, which we know that we're constantly tested and trying to find weaknesses, it would be other ways to try to reach out and influence Sweden. My political involvement really started in the 80s. One of the big issues for me was that this feather of a hen theory, somewhat saying that the East and the West are equally bad. And I couldn't really cope with that because, of course, an open society, democracies with all weaknesses, must be better than a closed and communistic society. So therefore, I think we have a revival of the post-Soviet era right now. And I hope this time that we go into this with more open eyes than we did in the 80s.
I can make a comparison since I became politically aware maybe a decade later when Russia was not in the same way considered a political force or a military force, so therefore the focus was more maybe towards American involvement in the Middle East, and that was the main source of political discussion in that sense. And now we sort of have to wake up to a new reality in my political generation, where we can not only focus on the way that one superpower has influence in broader parts of the world, but also another big power.
Okay, let's bring in a question from Ambassador Bajarunas.
Very much, Lithuanian Ambassador. The title of this seminar is the Baltic countries, the information tools in the Baltic countries, and the consequences of Sweden. What you will see the possibilities of our countries, Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, to cooperate more with Sweden on this field, exchange of information or threat analysis or engaging our institutions to cooperate more in to cope with this with the Russian propaganda especially. Yeah. Thank you.
I think it's very important because if you try to understand the Russian way of influence countries, they are very special for each country, and therefore I think we have to learn a lot from each other's because we can't expect them to look the same in different countries. Therefore, if we can sum up together and get the basic understanding, I think that would be a key to success. So I think that's very important.
Could you exemplify maybe what kind of actions you would like to see, or?
Well, I think a lot of methods. We know that, for example, the Russians had started 2 aggressions in the last 6 or 7 years. And they looked very much not the same. And I think what you have experienced in the Baltic states is not what we are experiencing here in Sweden. But if you can share that knowledge, I think we all can get a much more healthier approach to the problem.
If one separates short-term and long-term measures to promote a society that is resilient towards information operations, I must admit that I am unsure about what kind of short-term measures we can cooperate with. I have to admit, it is not my area of expertise, but I am quite sure that there are a lot of long-term measures that we can cooperate. Promotion of civil society, promotion of a cohesive society, which is beginning to become more of a problem in Sweden, but it is also already today a problem in many parts of Eastern Europe, and there I really think that we can cooperate more.
Okay, thank you. Doctor.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question. I wanted to recheck probably the feeling from your perspective. You should seen this and felt this. There's a constant increase of military aggressive communication by Putin with planes flying around, ships on the water, under the water, and so on. My question would be, how do you interpret what he is doing in the Baltic Sea specifically? What's your reaction towards his action? In this way, I want to get because I don't have an answer myself, what's the end goal of his aggressive communication by that? What's your interpretation of those military actions? Thank you.
Good question, thank you. Jakob Dalunde.
I'm not sure that the same measures taken by the Putin regime is to be interpreted similar in different neighboring regions. I think that there might be one goal towards maybe Ukraine and another goal towards the Baltic Sea, and I am afraid that there might be some kind of territorial ambitions towards Ukraine and their region, but I'm less convinced that there are similar ambitions towards the Baltic Sea. That it is more about general power projection, a stronger influence to show that Russia now is a force to be reckoned with, rather than actual ambitions.
Okay.
Yes, I think you can say mainly two things. Of course, provoking and trying to see what will the answer be from the Baltic states and the NATO, and of course trying to separate the European Union, to try to separate the NATO alliance. I think I think that's one of his main goals, of course, to try to get it destabilized and non-working. The other thing, I think, trying to test us all the way, trying to find weaknesses. As I learned in military college, we Swedes, when we go to an attack, we set in our reserves when we get weaknesses. The Russians do the opposite things. When they get success, they support. So I think they're trying to find the weaknesses, as well as in the military defense, as in other civil parts of for example, the electricity, water supplies, and all kinds of ways. And therefore, I think we have to have a very broad approach to the problem and see what's the vulnerabilities in the Swedish society.
So what do you say then about our response to this?
Well, I think a couple of years ago, maybe the response had something. Was a bit too low, maybe, but I think right now my picture is that we meet every aggression that we can see over the Baltic Sea.
I am mostly worried about long-term alignment, for example, for the Baltic states. So therefore, I think the most important thing is to strengthen ties with more trade, more cooperation, exchanges of students, and cooperation between civil society. That's the most important thing with Baltic states.
With the Baltic states.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So the civil society is here a key player.
Yes, because I believe that a strong civil society is a very good measure for resilience in a society against information operations. So therefore, I think Sweden should take more initiatives to promote civil society in Eastern Europe.
Okay, let me then ask you about this to create our own narrative we heard earlier today. But what do you say about that, or the actions needed to be taken also to strengthen the civil society?
Well, that's a hard one because I'm not really into that field, but I think there's a lot that have to be done. And my example that the newspapers printed truly lies is one of the things I think was a wake-up call. But I think the speaker after me will tell you all about that. Yeah.
Jakob, to you.
A couple of weeks ago, I was in Moscow and I visited the organization called the Memorial, which is both a museum and a human rights organization, and they have a big problem that because of a new law in Russia, when they communicate about their events, they have to say that they are a foreign agent because they receive support from other countries, and that becomes a very big problem for them. And so we have to fight this concept that we cannot support civil rights, human rights organizations, and to make sure that we can continue doing that without them being seen as foreign agents. And that's a very difficult thing to do, but I think it's important.
Yes, we have a question over there. No, please wait for the microphone.
Hi, thanks. I was wondering about the role of journalism in Sweden with respect to the resilience towards information operations. And I was just wondering if you could comment on two factors. One being the public's or the general population's understanding of journalism and journalistic craft and the process. And the second, whether there are journalistic practices today that make us less resilient, if there's been a shift in the media environment that we had maybe 20, 30 years ago and what we have now. And so the understanding in the public and the practices within journalism today. Thanks.
Okay. Jakob Telunde.
I would say the main problem is who is the editor of the news that I receive. Because previously you would subscribe to a newspaper and there would be an editor who takes responsibility of the broader content of the news. But now we mainly consume articles that are recommended to us through social media, and we less and less consume media in within an edited content. So therefore we have to think more about how can we make sure that people don't only receive news that already confirm their bias of how the world works, that we are more exposed towards a broader spectrum of opinion and analysis. And I think that will be a big struggle going forward.
Mm. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, well, it's a hard one because say to journalists what they should do is not really that we politicians should really do, but isn't it working? Is it better? I don't know if I got any.
I think it's on. It's working, yes.
Okay. I don't know really what to say how the journalists should work, but I think that we all should be aware that everything that's printed is not true, which it was maybe 20, 30 years, somewhat. But today you get showered with news, and most of the news you don't know who the editor or who is sending this message. And there I think we should be much more aware of who's sending the news, because not everything is true.
But speaking about the media landscape, we've seen a reality where the media, there are financial cuts, and the journalists, they have to report on everything, and we have very few specialists within the newspapers or TV, etc. How do you see this development? Is that worrying?
Yes, it is. I think it's worrying. And as I said before, the biggest newspaper in Sweden printed something that was obviously a lie. And at the same time, you can see Russia's hard economic facts to deal with today. And they even got cut downs in the defense spending. But one thing that are not cutting down is the media spending, which is still increasing. So Russia is really taking this field seriously. And I don't have the big answers today, but I think one thing that's important, I think that that we as Swedes, as authorities, we have a good intelligence, and therefore I'm glad that in the coming military program we have increased the spendings in intelligence, and I think that's one part at least to get a bit better picture.
Mm. Can we expect new legislation in any area related to this?
I think the legislation we got right now is quite working, and it's more a question of funding or getting the right equipment.
The Swedish government is working on a new media policy, which in part relates to this problem with media institutions and the way that we consume media now rather than previously. However, I wouldn't say that resilience towards information operations necessarily is a big part in that media policy, and maybe it should be.
Mm. Yes, we have a microphone coming here.
Thank you very much. A bit provoking, probably question. We are talking here about vulnerability of the Baltic states in this situation of mass, let's say, media campaign. But we should not forget that the Baltic states are NATO members, and they have certain assurances by this alliance. Actually, probably speaking hypothetically, I would like to put one actually probably hypothetical situation. Actually, is there a public awareness, for example, in Sweden, that in case of any potential potential turmoil, let's say, in Bornholm or in Gotland, which are both strategic islands in the Baltic Sea, consequences would be completely different, especially taking into account this nuclear blackmail, etc., etc. Is in Sweden awareness about NATO alliance guarantees, assurances, etc., and difference in this case?
Yes, what do you say about that? Jan, please.
Well, I think, for example, in many parts of Sweden, there's a lot of public support, but the discussion about alliance and what alliance we are in already and what alliance we should be in has just started. But I think that's a discussion that I think will keep up for a couple of years at least. And we can see that there's been somewhat turning in the pros of NATO membership. And of course we are discussing with Finland, which is a partner in the defense strategy. And of course, I think that Finland could not join NATO without Sweden and vice versa. So if we come to that decision and in Finland, things can go very fast. And if we come to that decision, we have to do it together with Finland and Sweden. And of course, I'm pro NATO membership, and I think it should benefit for all the Baltic Sea states and the security for us all if we all could be in the same alliance. Mm-hmm.
But yes, would this affect to a great extent also the work with information operations and how to counter them?
I think so. I think it would be easier to share information if we're part of the same alliance, yes.
Jakob Dalunde.
And I'm against NATO membership, not a surprise maybe, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take these new threats seriously. I really think that we should. And sometimes we Greens are being perceived as naive and we don't care about threats, but I really strongly feel that this is a threat, but mainly towards long-term alignment of states and geopolitical development. And I think we have to take it seriously now and focus a lot about the long-term measures to promote resilience.
And what would these long-term measures be?
For one example is the education system. We have to really educate our citizens to be critical towards sources and towards different parts of media, and I think we have to strengthen civil society, and I think that we need to have an economic development that promotes cohesiveness, and because I think it's a problem if there's development of pockets of society that don't feel that they belong towards the mainstream society and are more vulnerable towards information operations that promote a worldview that is different from the mainstream worldview. That's, I think, it's a long-term problem.
Finally, may I just ask you, I think that politicians, of course, is a target group when it comes to information operations. How do you see yourselves as targets? Please.
When I was much younger than now, when I was involved in the Swedish Young Greens, I recently became chosen as the spokesperson on the international affairs. I received an invitation for a meeting with a person from the Russian embassy. And I met this person, we have a very nice discussion, and then 2 weeks later I got an email from SÄPO to say that they wanted to meet me, and then we had a nice meeting and they tell me, oh, we think this person is a Russian spy, so please be aware if this person contacts you again. Yeah, it's a thing.
But now when you are in parliament, even it's...
No, not recently. But then again, you can never be sure. You always have to be critical about information and who you meet.
Yeah, I got a letter from the Russians, which was very clear stated if we join NATO, we would have problems, so to say. But I can say that I've been wired by the Russians, and I've been followed by the Russian secret police, so I know that they're interested in us. So you have to be vigilant, yes.
There are, of course, other actors than Russians when it comes to information operations. But yes, I would like to thank you so very much for being here with us. I know that there is something in Parliament waiting for you, so you must leave quite soon. But I suggest a big hand for Jakob Dalunde and Jan Andersson. So I would now like to introduce the next speaker, who comes from MSB, or the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency, which is an agency working exactly with these issues.
Sound check.
Sound check, yes, sounds perfect. And
Thank
we are happy to have Mikael Tovesson with us, who is head of Global Monitoring and Analysis section. And Mikael, you will tell us all about the influence campaigns from an MSB perspective. Welcome,
Yes,
and the floor
thank
is
you.
yours.
Thank you. And I should start by saying that this presentation will be narrow-minded, because I will not talk about influence campaigns as a general theme, because since I work for the government, I have some restrictions. So when I talk about this now, we will actually talk about it from the perspective that Swedish agencies and authorities have to protect the objectives for Sweden's security, our population, the security of the functionality of our society, and to maintain our fundamental values. And this is important for us. There are other actors and stakeholders that can have a broader perspective. I would also like to stress, since I'm going to mention some of the observations that we've done the last year, that of course I'm not pointing fingers at any country, but I will try to be very clear about what we've seen and what we've learned, because this have of course influenced us in our work, and it should have influenced, and it has influenced Sweden also. In Sweden, we don't have an organization called Psychological Defense. We used to have a board of psychological defense. That authority was shut down in 2009. That doesn't mean that Sweden doesn't have any capabilities, that we completely let that arena go. It lived on in different places, and these are some of the capabilities and activities or components, or call it whatever you like, that still exists in Sweden that could be engaged in the need of countering an influence campaign or an information operation. However, the 23rd of April, the government came with a proposal to the parliament and stated, and this is of the things that I thought was most interesting from my part, that they were stating that Sweden and its neighboring countries are already today subjected to influence operations. It's happening right now, it's existing. Sweden needs a psychological defense adapted to today's information environment. In other words, society has changed, and we need to adapt to the new society and the information environment. And we need actually to develop our capabilities to identify and counter influence campaigns. Of course, they're going on already right now. Another interesting thing, since we're here, we're talking about the Baltic states. When the sovereignty of our neighboring countries is put at risk, Sweden is affected negatively. In other words, we cannot see this problem as only a national interest, the problem begins at our borders. It begins globally, all around us. And of course, the last part there, which I really appreciated, MSB, my agency, plays an important role to facilitate the development of a modern psychological defense, together with other relevant state actors. And I will come back to that later. We're talking about not one agency, not one organization having a responsibility. We're talking about the whole society. So that was good, and we started to think, what does this mean to us? And this is what the government has told the parliament, and we listen to it. We also have to reflect what has happened recently. And you've already had presentations, very good ones, of what we've seen and what's going on. So I will actually skip very quickly through this. But needless to say, the events in Ukraine have been an eye-opener in regards to the use of information as a tool of power. We've learned a lot. So we've seen convincing information campaigns, information operations going on. For instance, blocking of media, blocking of communication. When you're sending out, when you communicate, usually nowadays you see on media, you can comment. Blocking your own comment fields just to make sure that your information goes out and no one can really comment your information is an interesting part of how things have been going on. And propaganda and counter-propaganda, really interesting. But of course, one of the most important things that we've seen here is the phenomena of conflicting information from both sides. What has really been going on lately? Who is lying? Who is telling the truth? Who knows? And the Ukrainian conflict, I would say also in the war there, and the annexation of Crimea and what's going on right now has had ripple effects also in Sweden. And for instance, there have been letters saying that Sweden is exporting artillery system to Ukraine. And to my knowledge and any Swedish knowledge, that is not going on right now. But apparently our Minister of Defense has written a letter to BA Systems regarding this. We've seen Twitter trolls in social media, and we've seen massive information. We now have Russian media sending information in Swedish to counter what is perceived as incorrect Swedish media regarding the conflict. But I would say that is not the biggest threat right now. I would say that we're not in the center of the limelight of this conflict. It has been ripple effects, as I said. I would actually point out that there are other influence campaigns going on in Sweden. For instance, the anti-democratization of Swedish youths, the population here in Sweden, that is actually now being recruited to ideologies that goes against our common values here, our view of democracy and the freedom of speech and individual rights. And that's something we really need to look into also. One shouldn't only have a threat perspective from other nations. So if this is the environment we've been seeing, we can make some general lessons identified. And of course, I can't say that we've learned yet, because we're still in a learning process. But what we've seen, especially in social media, that cultural competence is essential if you're going to have an effect on your opponent. But this can today be actively done. You don't have to be in Sweden to learn about our culture. You can actually be out there on Facebook, on Twitter, commenting and getting Swedish reactions and learning how we think and how we respond. And so in the future, you can fine-tune your messaging to the Swedish population. And that's really interesting. It's a sign of the global world we live in. It's not physical anymore, it's mental. The means of influence activities are very often legal. They are within the realm of freedom of speech, especially in our democratic countries. What we should be worried about is actually that this is an asymmetrical relation. Undemocratic countries can create laws, and they will create laws to block it. So we should also see that if we want to counter message, we're not playing on with the same rules here. It's low cost and high effect, clearly. But what we've also seen that there is a whole society approach. I would almost say network-based. That when someone is influencing today, they use all their society. So this can happen from companies, from individuals, from political side, economical, or military. It's a whole society approach. In other words, to respond to this, we have to have a whole society approach. And also, when are we in a conflict? It has become invisible, the lines. There are no clear lines, since it can start as something very little, and then suddenly someone, after a while, we realize had an intent to influence us, or even perhaps push us down on our knees to win over us. And we never understood when it really started. So now we have to be more open with the concept of conflict in future. And of course, this is going on right now in several countries, and Sweden has to realize that this can really happen to us. We have to be on our toes. And that was the long startup. So I have another 12 minutes to actually go into influence campaigns. What is the Swedish perspective on this? Because now I've said what we've heard from our government and what we've seen. We now had to put this in our context. And first of all, I'm not going to go into the definition discussion, and please, let's not get there. I'm going to try to explain how we think about it. But of course, we proposed a definition to the government earlier this year, what we see as an influence campaign. And we hear information operations, information activities, and all the other ones. But it's really about someone using information to get the upper hand on our expense. And it can be on a national tragical level, and it can be in the little situation. But one also need to realize it's aimed towards our decision making, or our opinions, our population, and at the same time, it can be used towards another country, so that will in its turn affect us. So direct or indirect, and I assume that in most situations, the indirect solution is probably the best one if you want to have an effect on Sweden, the Swedish population, and Swedish decision making. Since Swedes really don't like people telling them what's wrong and right. We already know what's wrong and right in our minds. So when we look at this, there are some general concepts regarding information operations, for instance. And the traditional one is, of course, the dime, where you use information through diplomacy, information itself, military or economical means to influence someone. You use information and the perception and perception tools. And this is how the aggressor would work on it, and that's that theory. But that doesn't mean that we should turn this one around and say, okay, we need to have a dime concept in Sweden. We need to actually translate this into what is important to Sweden, because someone might use all these tools, but if they have no effect, so what? For instance, I've had a lot of questions from media. Oh, they're lying about this down in Ukraine, or they're saying that's not true. Well, and that's not good that people are lying out there. But for me, and I showed you the first picture, was what is important for me as a government agency. Well, I have to have a national perspective. And then we figured this out, that the previous picture, see that at someone with an intent who have coordinated actions aimed toward us, and they can be overt or covert. But what they are actually doing, they are attacking our system. And our system could be how we perceive things through our institutions, organizations, decision-making, the public opinion. And they attack us through correct, actually, misleading or false information, and makes us perceive something that is incorrect and will make us also think of an issue or make decisions that will play their way and not our way. But they can also do this on a physical standpoint. For instance, making sure that we don't get the information that we need, or that we can't spread the information that needs to be spread from our standpoint. And also the traditional diplomatic and economical or military means. But for these to really matter to us in the protection of our national interests, they have to have an effect on our sovereignty, the population, the functionality of our society, and our fundamental values, the first picture, or other interests that makes us losers and them winners. This is really a game or conflict of intent and effects. And that's how we perceive it. And I would like to add that this is not only directed towards Sweden. If someone does this to another country, so it will affect us, we need to act, we need to respond. And how do we think about this then? How do we go about this? Well, as we see it, we have to look at the aggressor actually. We need to have a capability to identify what are they doing long term. And in that respect, because that's how they build up their capabilities and their opportunities to respond and react in short term. So, and also, of course, what's going on right now and how are we being influenced? We need to be able to identify that. But we also realize that, okay, so they're doing it. At the same time, we have to identify what are our vulnerabilities to these actions. So we understand what they have, what effects they have. And then, if we can identify what they're doing, then we need to understand what is the intent and capacity of what they are doing. And then in that sense, we also need, at the same time, need to understand what are the consequences to our society. So when we put these two perspectives together, then we can counter. And our perspective of countering is, of course, that it starts with the long-term perspective, creating awareness. But also, I would say, credibility for our institutions. To be able to counter, we have to be trustworthy and believable. And all of this needs to be supported by research, development, and training. And to the last picture, actually, some conclusions. We're not there yet. We're way behind, I would say, right now. We have some serious issues that we need to deal with. First of all, I think we need a national strategy for this, because this is in the democratic realm. We have to be very sensitive with what we're doing. So we have to have a broad understanding among the population about how to go about these things. And to do this, we have to research. We have to understand what this is, the threat and our new information environment in our society. And then, of course, increased cooperation. And this is a team play within Sweden and internationally. We can't do this on our own. And strengthening our openness as society is a really important part, and that has to really start now. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, the threat is whole society. We need to respond whole society. In other words, everyone has to be in on this. We have to also support media now, but on their terms. We cannot, we have to be very democratically sensitive here, and also trust media in their position. And I'm not just saying this to make the next speaker happy if he's coming here. I really believe in this. And then education and awareness. And finally, actually, it's also influence campaigns, information operations are being done because they can do them. So you need to confront them to show them that's not going to work. You actually have to talk to us in a civil manner. You have to be gentlemanly diplomatic about this, and we really need to say, stop it and don't try this. And then we have to show that we can do it. And I think the politicians have left, or I would also like to stress that this is important, but we have to also make this an important matter and make it a priority. And priority, I'm sorry, it's going to cost money, not a lot. This is one of the cheapest things Sweden can actually build when it comes to defense, with the highest effect. So, there.
Thank you very much. Mikael Tovesson, we have some questions for you, of course, before we continue. Thank you, first of all, for a very interesting presentation. It's a big challenge that you have to deal with, and that we all have to deal with, of course. One thing that you mentioned here, increased cooperation, and we talked a little about NATO membership, what that could mean when it comes to this challenge. And how is the international cooperation today? What are the connections that we have, and are they fruitful?
I would say that we're in a startup situation right now, but of course we see EU as an important part, but also our neighboring countries. The government told us the neighboring countries are important, so, and we've picked that up, and that's where we are right now. But and I can't really give you a status, but I think it looks promising.
That's very good to hear. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, there is a microphone coming here.
Hi, I was wondering about you mentioned that lies about the conflict in Ukraine, and the question, does that affect the Swedish population? And I think I would argue that it does, in the sense that you have sort of autonomy and availability of good information, of valid information for Swedish citizens, and that, in that sense, fabrications about anything anywhere might be an issue for the Swedish population. Would you comment on that?
I totally agree with you. And that's why I think media is one of our main stakeholders here. And they need to be supported regarding this. Because if we don't have the correct information, no matter what it is, we don't make the right decisions. I think that is something that can only be dealt with long term, and it's a delicate matter because it is about the freedom of our institutions. So, but I agree with you.
Thank you. Please.
If I may, I wanted to take this opportunity just to remark how interconnected we are on the influence or information operations. A specific example that Lithuania went through and is going through still is the closure of RTR Planeta channel. I just, for the context, wanted to say how this is interconnected. They are communicating that they are licensed in Sweden, and they are Swedish channel, and they are working under European regulation and so on. And this is, my remark is on the level that even under such a situation, when Kremlin chose to free ride in many cases our freedoms and the norms, we can act upon this. Because what Lithuania did was evoking media directive clause on hate speech, and it went into practice for temporary banning of this channel for 3 months. And this sometimes brings and questions in Western colleagues, but it's again the question of Putin's test. Hate speech on ethnic background, it was the case of Ukraine, but then you in the slide presented the issue of ISIL's recruitment and then hate speech on religious basis. Or in other cases, we have hate speech based on sexual orientation and then things like that. And just my remark that we can act upon norms that we have, and we don't have to enter the realm of reviewing and changing and stuff like that.
Yeah, but it has to be founded on our laws, not on our opinion.
Yeah.
Okay, we have two final questions here, please.
Yes, I'm very intrigued by this, especially support to media and actively confronting influence campaigns and so on. What's needed? More resources you talked about?
Yeah.
Do we need an agency of truth, or what?
Yeah.
How do we do this?
Yeah, absolutely not. The agency of truth, I don't think that is the way to go. It is about creating a stronger, resilient society, the whole society approach. And that's why I think it's like an orchestra. You know, we have to play along, well coordinated, and communicate with each other. So what we would like to focus on is actually strengthening every stakeholders within their area of responsibility. And then, but to be able to do this, I strongly believe that we don't understand the problem yet fully in a Swedish context or in a Baltic region context yet. We need to understand the threat and our vulnerabilities. And when we do that, then you will have the answer of what we should focus on, because we have to eradicate our vulnerabilities.
So we'll get back on that question for sure. Jan Helander, very short one.
Indeed, very short. Jan Helander, Swedish MED. Just some clarification on the government bill, because I was one among those who worked specifically on the government bill related to these issues that was related to. And one thing is what was mentioned here in the presentation, excellent one though, is MSB's suggestion for a definition on what is translated into campaigns and as you mentioned. But the reason we did not respond to this suggestion on a specific definition is that we're a bit wary about that, because if you enter into a specific definition, you will end up in different kinds of problems, what is and what is not included, because this is what we're talking about, as you know perfectly well, and we all know, most of us at least, is a wide spectrum of different kinds of activities and operations. So I just want to clarify that the government did specifically not respond to this suggestion on having a definition, because we're a bit wary about it. That doesn't mean we don't support the idea on how to counter. But I would like to add to that part that what we also emphasize in the government bill quite clearly is that MSB and other relevant agencies in particular need to improve their capabilities to identify, understand and countermeasures, and to improve their capabilities in cooperating and coordinating their efforts. And we will follow this very closely from the government offices in cooperation with the relevant agencies on how this work develops. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, and it sounds like you're working very hard on this indeed. Thank you so much, Mikael Toresson, for being here with us today. Thank you. Now, the previous speakers have talked a lot about the role of media, and we will end the seminar by meeting Anders Lindberg, who is editorial writer at Aftonbladet, and he will elaborate a little bit on his views on the role of media. Welcome, Anders.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure I can answer the questions that was put forward in all these discussions, but my name is Anders Lindberg. I come from Aftonbladet, which is the largest Swedish newspaper, and we're also the largest paper on the internet, which is quite interesting when we speak about the new media landscape. But I will try to be brief and have some thoughts on this matter. Is this mine? Okay. Yeah, exactly. This is a picture which I think is very nice. It's a picture that was widely distributed from a Russian troll called Novorossiya Rises. This was one of the pictures spread out on the internet from Ukraine war. Children of hate, children of war, Ukraine SS shame, I want war. And this little wonderful girl that wants to have war with everyone else, basically. This is a major part of internet. And for young people, this is a major part of their whole media consumption. Because what we see today is that people follow media through their social media accounts. This is the real picture. This is not so widely distributed. This is made of Photoshop. This story did not exist. It has this together with many other stories on internet that does not exist, but is maybe not so widely spread. In the end, someone answered this, and it's a fight on the internet. The major problem, and this illustrates a few points, which I think is quite interesting. Which one of these is true? How do I know which one of these is true? And why should I report any of them? Could I believe this? Or could I believe this? Both could be made in Photoshop. Both could be sent from someone, and I don't know. As a media outlet, my choice is probably not to report, because I can't know the truth. I think we have discussed a little bit about the Russian disinformation campaign in Ukraine, but also concerned with the Baltic states, out of a perspective which the researchers very often have, where they usually say that this is nothing new. Russia has always done this. If you go back to Swedish history, we can read the story of Swedish battles throughout history, and we always find this misinformation campaigns. Maybe it's always like war is misinformation, so maybe it's not so strange. But the fact is that there is some things that's very, very new in this spectrum, which I think media has in certain amount become an area for what has been called the weaponization of information, which is partly a new perspective. It's not new that it happens, but the researchers has, to a certain extent, some things wrong, I think. The first area is capacity building. These factors, if you look at Russia today, the old version, or what in Swedish called the Russian voice, it's rubbish. It doesn't affect anyone. It's the same quality as the Saudi Arabian communications, as you saw during the discussion about Saudi Arabia, with funny internet accounts, with funny names, and completely without cultural knowledge about Sweden. If you look at Russian voice, the historical one, it looks like it was Google Translate, except Google Translate didn't exist. The new one is much more targeted. It's much smarter. It's much better. It's built on knowledge in Sweden, and it's built on knowledge in the Baltic states, which is, I would say, very, very highly effective. It uses the new media. If you look at RT, if you look at Sputnik, if you look at the troll factories, I would say this is state of the art, much better than anything we could muster in Sweden. And that is not very strange, because this is not a democracy. And a democracy can't do this. I will come back to this factor. But the capacity building is new, the size of this thing. The second thing is social media. Today, social media is taking over more and more of our lives. I don't know if any of you have Apple Watch yet. Usually in every seminar there's one guy putting up his hand, young guy usually saying, I have an Apple Watch. But the thing is that what we're doing now is that we personalize technology in a matter that we are controlled by it. more or less. Young people are controlled by their media flows, which basically means that it's the Facebook algorithm that controls which media we consume, rather than anything else. I have a friend at my job, Ehsan Fadakar, who is the social media chef. He started a new account and pretended to be a Sweden Democrat. He just liked Sweden Democrat pages. And he realized that when he went in with his Facebook account as a Sweden Democrat, he got the completely other story than the real one. And I think that one of the reasons that Aftonbladet, the editorial page, started very early to discuss this Russian campaign that we saw was that we are so used to dealing with right-wing extreme campaigns, and they are very similar. The campaigns from the Swedish Nazis or the Sweden Democrats are very close in the way they're organized, structured, what they say, like what the Russians were in the beginning. And when the Syrian war started, the Russian information started to sound like the Swedish extreme right, which was very interesting, but it was a complete shift. And that was through social media. The third is new technology. If you would go on a bus in Stockholm 7 years ago, you would see everyone reading Metro. There would be a forest of metros around. If you go on the same bus today, everyone reads this smartphone. So in 5 years, the complete spectrum of how we consume information have changed. And the smartphones are brilliant to disinformation, through moving pictures, through audio. So we have streaming video, streaming audio directly from when things happened. I would say the first happening in history that was sent through this, which sort of competed with us, was the Arab Spring. People consumed more information on the Arab Spring from social media than from real media or old media. The fourth one is the media in crisis. This is something very important because historically media has special reporters for different areas like this. Now we don't have that anymore. I think we have like one in Sweden that is a special reporter on defense. 2 or 1.5 more or less that we have in Sweden today. Which basically means that media abdicate from its role and report both sides of a story. The problem is when you deal with someone that continuously lies and someone who tells the truth, and you think that the truth is in between, you end up with lying yourself. And you don't do what media should do, which is report the truth. This crisis is because of economy, because our advertising goes somewhere else. Facebook is eating up our advertising, or Facebook, or Google, or Twitter, or whatever. But this is a fact. And this cannot be replaced, I would argue, by anything. Because our society is made up of competition. When the difference between democracy and sovereign democracy is competition. In our system, someone else could win. In the Russian system, someone else can't win. And the same thing goes with media. It's competition between different media outlets. It's competition between different truth. It's the same thing with our research. It's competition between different stories. And this is the key to understanding also how we should counter people that lies. It's through telling the truth. And our system is slow. It took like half a year before Sweden understood that this was like Russian propaganda and not like the other side of the story. But once we realized this, it's much less common. And I would say that the main driver in this have been people that wrote about that they're lying on Twitter, on Facebook, in the pages. So the way our competition works is in itself a way to counter this. And I think that what made the Russian disinformation special this time was that we were unprepared. And this was not a very nice situation the last year. But now we are not unprepared anymore. We know this. I would say that the things people wrote 1 year ago, they wouldn't get away with today. They couldn't spread information like what happened. I love this picture. This is a Russian channel, a Ukrainian channel, and Al Jazeera telling about a rocket that hit a van. It's a wonderful picture. You can tell so many stories to this. This was distributed through media as an example of people that media doesn't follow their sources, that media doesn't check facts. until someone asked, where did you get the picture from? And who didn't check the sources? Was this ever sent on these 3 channels? Or is this picture completely doctored? This is one of the key factors. From being maybe media responsible, which is one part, maybe the government has a role in this, it goes back to the individual. Not to distribute things you don't know where they come from. And just question. I mean, follow what RT is saying. Question more. Question, where did you get that from? Where is your original source? Because once you start checking the original sources, most of these stories break up. I have tried to follow this picture, and I haven't found it. I found in the end a troll account that sent it out. It might be fake, it might be real, I don't know. But it's a very, very good example. The other thing which I think is a risk is this. Nietzsche. When you look long enough into the abyss starts, if you stare into the abyss starts staring into you. If you long enough stare at Russian media, you might become the same thing. You might start believing that if you lie better than they, you win. In Swedish, you have an expression which says that don't argue with morons or don't fight with morons because they bring you down and beat you with experience. I think it's quite important that we don't try to copy their methods. I met some parliamentarians from Ukraine some 1 month ago who tell us about this Ministry of Information and all of these strategies. They are wrong on a value basis because this is not the values we should stand up for. But I would argue they're also wrong because they don't work. And the same parliamentarians were surprised when they had told the truth to the international media, but it was first when the BBC correspondent came there and saw it by himself that the media believed them. Because media is trust, and you need to have trust in the independence of media. This is my favorite example of not working source control. The U-boat could be from the Netherlands, from Holland. This was sent through all Swedish media. It was widely distributed, which is quite fun because it was completely made-up story. This is the second, anonymous eyewitness. The Ukrainian fighter jet shot down MH17. This was also through Swedish media. How should we counter this? I don't think that the government can. We can. We can do like this. Do you remember the help transport that the Russians sent to East Ukraine? It was a debate in Sweden. Is this a help transport? We answered this by this Trojan horse. The text is Putin's Trojan horse to Ukraine. It's fun. Not very fun, but quite fun. And, which is more important, it completely destroys their story by another narrative. Could the government do this? No way. So this is a very important lesson. So, my point is, the answer from the media perspective is traditional journalistic values. Journalism. Keep the distance between the free state and media. Report the facts and use original sources. Understand that information operations is not one side of the story, it's a military tool. And don't feed the trolls. Don't try to be like the Russian communications. And, as Albert Einstein said, do not believe everything you read on Twitter. Control your own information.
Thank you so much, Anders Lindberg. We will very soon conclude this seminar, but I would like to ask you, because many people have touched upon the need for supporting media. In what way would you like to see support for the media?
To be honest, not very many ways. I think Ronald Reagan once said that the most scary word in the English language is "I'm from the government and I'm here to help you." I think there is some point in that when it comes to media. I think that what could be very important could be to take correct information on how this system works. The Swedish Defense Research Agency has done that quite a lot in looking at, for example, in the Baltic states and so on. I think that is very important to deliver correct information. But I shy from every idea to like help the media report correct things, because that usually end up with media report the wrong things and people don't trust the media. So I think that provide correct information, provide the psychological defense in terms of knowledge, but don't try to sort of change the way media reports. It is a slower system when we fight with each other, but since we're independent, it's more trustworthy in the long run.
Note taken. Thank you so much, Anders Lindberg. You will get a small gift, of course. We always give a paperback book to the speakers, and also that you will also have a book, of course. You may choose whatever you haven't read yet. We need to finish. I know that there are lots of questions, and I'm sorry that we have run out of time, so we need to close this seminar now. I have someone waving here. Yes, okay. We will, of course, get the director here, have a final word.
Yeah, no, thank you, and we never met before, and I would like to thank you for confirming everything I tried to say in my presentation. And indeed, the question what we can do to help media, and I agree, government should stay away from dictating what media should do, but government, and especially in countries or markets where democratic traditions are just developing and do not have long traditions, is first and foremost support to self-regulation of media. Because these are journalists who should define what are the minimum ethical standards that media should follow by themselves. That's the one thing. And the second thing is invest in professionalism of media through education, for instance, in universities and in journalism schools. Because what we see that this uncertainty of economic model of media brings down the quality of journalism in general, and not necessarily in specific outlets, but in general. And so through sustaining this professionalism and supporting professionalism, I think this is something governments could do.
Thank you very much for these words. I would like to also once again direct a thank you to the Embassy of Latvia and Lithuania for this cooperation. I think myself that it has been a very interesting seminar, and I believe that you think the same. And let us finish with a warm applause for the speakers.